There is a smell that comes with a house that has been yours for 40 years. It is not a grand smell, not perfume or fresh flowers or anything you would choose on purpose. It is wood that has absorbed decades of cooking. It is the particular damp of a basement after rain. It is something underneath all of that, something I cannot name, that tells me every single time I walk through the front door that I am home. I noticed it the morning after my son's rehearsal dinner. I stood in the kitchen at 6 a.m., still in my robe, and I breathed it in without thinking. Then I remembered what had happened the night before, and my chest went tight, and I set down my coffee cup because my hands had started to shake. Let me start from the beginning. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 63 years old, and I have lived in this house since I was 22, and I raised 2 children here, and I buried my husband here, and I was not planning to give any of it away. My son, I will call him my son because that is what he is, whatever else he has become, is 34. His name is Conrad. He has his father's jaw and his father's way of going quiet when he is angry, that particular stillness that looks like patience but is not. I love that about his father. On Conrad, it has always made me uneasy. He met his fiancée 3 years ago. Her name is Melissa. She is pretty in the way that photographs are pretty, everything arranged correctly, nothing out of place. The first time Conrad brought her to dinner, she complimented my curtains. I thanked her. She asked if they were original to the house. I said yes. She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are calculating something. I told myself I was imagining it. Conrad proposed 8 months after they met. I was happy for him. I was. I drove to his apartment with a bottle of champagne and I hugged them both, and I meant every word of it. I want my son to be loved. I want him to have what his father and I had. That was always true. The trouble did not start with the engagement. It started with the house. It is a Victorian in the older part of the city. 4 bedrooms, high ceilings, the kind of place that nobody builds anymore. My husband bought it young, before such things became impossible, and we spent our entire marriage making it ours. Every room has a story I could tell you. The kitchen floor that we retiled ourselves over a single long weekend when the children were at my sister's. The window seat in the upstairs hall where I used to read to them before bed. The garden out back where my husband planted a pear tree the year Conrad was born. That tree is 34 years old now. It still produces fruit. About 6 months before the wedding, Conrad came to visit alone. He said Melissa was working. We sat at the kitchen table and he asked if I had thought about my plans for the house. I said I did not know what he meant. He said with the wedding coming up, with his new life starting, he had been thinking about the future, about where things would land eventually. He said it carefully, the way you say something you have been practicing. I told him the house would be taken care of in my will, the same as it always had been. He had a sister. Everything would be divided fairly. That had always been the plan. He nodded. He said Melissa had found a financial advisor who specialized in estate transitions and that maybe it would be worth meeting with him, just to talk. I said I already had an attorney who handled these things. He nodded again and changed the subject. We had dinner and he hugged me goodbye, and I stood at the door and watched him drive away. And I thought that was strange. But I let it go. I should not have let it go. The wedding was held in October at a venue about 40 minutes outside the city, a renovated barn, which I understand is fashionable. It was beautiful, truly. Lanterns strung from the rafters, long wooden tables, flowers everywhere. I had helped pay for a portion of it, not because anyone asked me to, because Conrad is my son, and I wanted his wedding to be what he wanted. I arrived early. I was wearing a navy dress that I had bought specifically for the occasion and spent 3 weeks second-guessing. My daughter, her name is Audrey, she lives in Portland, flew in 2 days before. We had breakfast together that morning and she braided a small piece of my hair back from my face the way she used to do when she was a girl, and I almost cried right there at the table. The ceremony was at 4. I sat in the front row. Conrad cried when he saw Melissa walking down the aisle. I cried too. That part was real. Whatever came after, that part was real. The reception was where things changed. I was standing near the bar about an hour in, talking to my brother-in-law, when I saw Melissa's mother heading toward me with a look on her face that I recognized. I have been alive long enough to recognize that look. It is the look of someone who has been sent. She said very pleasantly that it might be nice if I mingled more with the other guests, spread out a little. The way she said it, too polished, too cheerful. I understood that she was not making small talk. I said I had been mingling just fine. She said that Conrad and Melissa had a vision for the reception, a certain energy, and that it would mean a lot to them if I could perhaps spend more time at the table in the back, near the older relatives. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I excused myself. I found Conrad near the dance floor. I touched his arm and asked if we could speak privately for just a moment. He glanced over at Melissa first. I saw him do it, and then he followed me to a quieter corner near the door. I told him what his mother-in-law had said. He did not look surprised. He said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, he said that tonight was about him and Melissa, and that I had a way of making things about myself without realizing it, and that it would be easier for everyone if I just kept a low profile for the evening. I stood there in my navy dress in his wedding venue with the music playing and the lanterns overhead, and I looked at my son's face, and I did not recognize it. I said very quietly, "Is this what you want?" He looked away. I picked up my purse from the table where I had left it. I found Audrey on the dance floor, and I leaned down and told her I was going to head out. She started to protest. I squeezed her hand and told her to stay and have a good time and that I would call her in the morning. Then I walked out through the barn doors and into the October night, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time before I could drive. I did not cry until I got home. I cried for a while after that. Audrey called me at midnight. I did not pick up. I texted her that I was fine and that I loved her and that I would explain everything in the morning. I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling, and I thought about Conrad at 11 years old, standing in this very room during a thunderstorm asking me if everything was going to be okay. I thought about his father, who died 6 years ago now, who loved that boy more than anything. I thought about what his father would have made of tonight. I did not sleep. At 9 the next morning, Conrad called. I answered because I thought he was calling to apologize. I sat up in bed and took a breath, and I answered the phone. He said good morning. He said the wedding had been beautiful. He said Melissa was asleep and he was having coffee, and he just wanted to check in. I waited. He asked if I had thought any more about the estate planning conversation we'd had earlier in the year. I was quiet for a moment. I genuinely was not sure I had heard him correctly. He said the thing was, he and Melissa were thinking about their future, about stability. They had found a property developer who was interested in older homes in my neighborhood, and the timing was good. And if I were willing to start the transfer process, not sign anything yet, just begin the conversation, it would mean a great deal to both of them. I sat there in my bed, in my house, in my robe, the morning after he had asked me to sit in the back with the old people at his wedding, and I listened to my son tell me about a property developer who was interested in my home. I said, "Conrad, I need to ask you something directly." He said, "Okay." I said, "Does Melissa know how your father felt about this house?" He paused. He said that was not really relevant. I said, "Does she know that your father planted a pear tree in the back garden the year you were born?" He was quiet. I said, "Does she know that the kitchen floor is original hardwood and that your father and I refinished it by hand, and that there is a small stain near the back door that you made when you were 7 years old and spilled a whole pot of red paint, and that I never fixed it because I liked knowing it was there?" He said with an edge in his voice. "Mom," I said, "I am going to call my attorney today." He said that was a very mature decision and that he was glad we were finally having this conversation. I said, "You misunderstand me." I hung up. I sat with the phone in my lap for a minute. Then I got up and washed my face and put the kettle on and called my attorney, a woman named Frances, who I have known for 22 years, who has no patience for nonsense and charges accordingly. I told her what had happened. I told her about the rehearsal dinner, about being sidelined at the wedding, about the call that morning. I told her about the property developer. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always respected about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "How soon can you come in?" I went in 2 days later. We sat in her office with the blinds half drawn and the afternoon light coming in sideways, and she walked me through everything. What I could do, what I should do, what I needed to do now before anything else moved forward. I had always intended to leave the house to Conrad and Audrey equally. That had been the plan since before my husband died. He and I had discussed it, put it in writing, made sure it was clean. But a plan is a document, not a promise. And Frances reminded me of something I had forgotten, that I was still alive. The house was mine. I could do with it what I needed to do. We spent 2 hours going through options, a trust, a restructured will, a conversation with Audrey, who I trusted completely and who I knew would understand. I called Audrey that evening. She was still in town, staying at a hotel downtown before her flight the next afternoon. I asked if she could come over. She came. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Conrad had talked to me about estate transitions, and I told her everything, all of it, the conversations before the wedding, what his mother-in-law had said, what Conrad had said. The phone call that morning. Audrey has her father's eyes. When she is upset, they go very still. She sat there with her hands around her mug, and she listened, and by the time I finished, her eyes were very still. She said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "Long enough that I should have seen it sooner." She said, "What do you need from me?" That was the moment I understood the difference between my two children. Not the moment at the wedding, not the phone call. This moment, this question, asked without condition, without negotiation, without a glance toward a door. I told her what Frances and I had discussed. I told her I wanted to restructure things so that the house would be protected, not taken away from Conrad, not punished, protected. Audrey nodded. She said, "Do whatever you need to do." I went back to Frances's office the following week. I signed what needed to be signed. I put things in order the way I should have put them in order years ago, not because I was angry, though I was, but because I finally understood that love and legal clarity are not opposites. They are not in competition. You can love someone completely and still not hand them a weapon. Conrad called again 3 weeks later. He asked if I had spoken to my attorney. I said I had. He asked if we were moving forward. I said I had taken care of things, yes. He asked what that meant. I said, "It means the house is protected." He was quiet. Then he said, "Protected from what?" I said, "From being used as a transaction." He was quiet again for a long time. Then he said, in a different voice, lower, something stripped out of it, he said, "I didn't mean for it to go like this." I said, "I know you didn't mean for it to go like this." But it did. He said Melissa had been the one pushing, that the developer had approached her, not him, that he had gotten caught up in it and hadn't known how to say no. I listened. I did not say, "You knew how to say no to me at your wedding?" I did not say any of the sharp things I had been carrying around for 3 weeks. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, and I looked at the red paint stain near the back door, and I thought about how complicated it is to love someone who has disappointed you. I said, "Conrad, I am your mother. I will always be your mother. But you need to understand something. This house is not an asset on a balance sheet. This is where you grew up. This is where your father lived and died. This is where you came when you were sick or scared or didn't know what to do. What you tried to do, what you let happen, was not something I can pretend didn't happen. He said, "Are you cutting me out?" I said, "No, but I am not pretending either." He asked if we could talk more. In person. I said yes, but not yet. I said I needed more time. He said okay. We hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a while after that. The house was very quiet. Outside, the pear tree was bare. It was November by then, but I could see it through the kitchen window, all those branches still there. Some things take a long time to get back to. Some things you have to let sit through a season before you can look at them straight. I know that. I have been alive long enough to know that. I am not sure what happens next with Conrad. I am not sure we have found our way back to each other yet. But I know that whatever comes next, I will meet it from here, from this kitchen, from this house that smells like 40 years of being alive in it. I did not fight for it because it is valuable. I did not protect it because of what it is worth. I protected it because of the stain near the back door, and the pear tree, and the window seat upstairs, and every ordinary, irreplaceable thing that a person builds a life out of, and because some things are not for sale, not for any reason, not to anyone. I have been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, the way you think about things when you are 63 and the house is still, and you have time to sit with what happened. Conrad did not wake up one morning and decide to become someone who would send his mother to the back of a room at his own wedding. That is not how it works. It was smaller than that. It was every time I made an excuse for a sharp comment, every time I told myself he was stressed, or that Melissa was just adjusting, or that family dynamics are complicated and I should not read too much into things. I smoothed things over so many times that I stopped being able to see the shape of what was forming underneath. That is on me. Not all of it, but some of it. What I understand now is that there is a difference between being loving and being willing. I was willing to overlook things I should not have overlooked. I was willing to hand over my discomfort quietly because I did not want conflict with my son. And that willingness, that particular kind of softness, was not kindness. It was avoidance dressed up as patience. The morning Conrad called about the house, something shifted in me. Not anger exactly. Clarity, the kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with what is in front of you and just look at it. I had raised him. I had sat with him through every hard thing. I had loved him without condition and without keeping score. And he had looked at the place where all of that happened. The kitchen, the garden, the window seat, 40 years of a life. And he had seen something to negotiate with. That told me everything I needed to know about what had been prioritized in the years I was not watching closely enough. Going to Francis was not about punishing Conrad. I want to be clear about that. I did not restructure my estate because I was angry, though I had every right to be. I did it because I finally understood something I should have understood much earlier, that protecting what matters is not the same as withholding love. You can hold both. You can love someone completely and still not leave the door unlocked. Audrey asked me what I needed. That question, so simple, so without agenda, is what real love sounds like. Not the negotiated kind, not the kind that comes with the developer's contact information attached. I think about what I want Conrad to take from this if he takes anything. Not shame, not punishment. I want him to understand that the things worth having in this life are not transferable. The pear tree in the back garden is not an asset. It is 34 years of a father's love made visible. You cannot put that on a balance sheet. And when you try, when you let someone convince you to try, you lose something that no amount of money or square footage will ever give back. Integrity is not something you protect once and then have forever. It is a daily choice. So is loyalty. So is knowing the difference between what you are owed and what you have been given. I do not know yet where Conrad and I land. That is still unwritten. But I know who I am in this house. I know what I am willing to protect. And I know that the woman who walked out of that barn in October, quietly, without a scene, in her navy dress, was not defeated. She was just finally paying attention.